Okay, so what was the question about turn the other cheek?
Oh, what do you think that means? Like, dissect it a little bit for us.
What do people normally think it means? Come Matthew chapter 5, Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says, if someone slaps you in the face, turn to them the other cheek.
Right, which would mean, here's my other cheek to slap as well. Right?
So someone's violent to you, and this is how you're supposed to respond. Right?
Right. And growing up, I've grown up in church. When I heard that and, turn the other cheek, I never thought it meant like, hey, give me this side. Like, here's this side to slap as well. I just thought like, oh, like, just let them do it. Or, it's okay. Just give them grace or forgive them. But
I think it can mean that.
I think it can mean that. But when I read it over and over again, giving me the other cheek is like, here's this one too. Go ahead, if you hit me on this one. So what have you learned in your kind of study of that scripture?
Well, what happened was, I was at a birthday party or a party at somebody's house that and a famous pastor author came to the party that I really admired. Don't need to bring his name up. But just a guy, I'd read all of his books, and I just greatly admired him. He taught me a lot about the Bible. Really famous for teaching like first century, like historic rabbi traditions and Israeli traditions about Judaism and stuff. And, we get into this great conversation for like an hour.
You can tell this is not a rager party, guys. This is a get together.
Yeah, we're just like taking shots.
As you're discussing theology. All right, go ahead.
Taking shots, talking systematic theology. Oh my gosh. Anyways, jokes. So we're talking for we're deep in this conversation, and he says, well, when Jesus told people to turn the other cheek, he wasn't telling them to sign up for more violence. He was telling them to protest. And I'm like, what? And he goes, in ancient cultures, when a Roman soldier or a master to a slave, they were allowed to slap their slaves around. And it was permissible to backhand a slave, right?
Wow.
Or a soldier could backhand a common person. Like, you gotta understand, Israel was occupied by Rome.
Yeah.
And so there was a subservient situation. So he could backhand a citizen, and that citizen couldn't do anything about it.
Right.
The same soldier could say, hey, I have to go carry my 50-pound bag of weapons and resources with me for 1 mile.
You have to do that.
Yeah,
the citizen would have to do that.
And what would happen is if you did that for a mile, you walk a whole mile there and a whole mile back, you've lost like an hour, and like that messes, you can't work that day, And it's like, it's awful because it's like, here's a Roman that is your enemy, that is like,
in charge, like has authority over you.
Is occupying your place and maybe murdered,
a family member, right?
And your hard-earned money from being a fisherman or whatever is paying his salary for more oppression. So like your taxes are fueling your own oppression. I mean, it's an awful situation, right? Well, in this conversation, there's 3 kind of things that happen there on the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus is talking. One of them, he says, turn the other cheek back toward him. And it's possible, and I don't know if I believe this, but it's possible what that means. And there's people smarter than me who say it is. That when he says turn the other cheek, he's saying when you get backhanded with one hand, you turn toward the other cheek so he can't backhand you again, because the only way they're allowed to do it was a backhand. So when you turn the other cheek,
silent protest.
Yeah, you're not hitting them back, but you're also not letting them punk you over and over again.
Interesting.
And that when you do that toward them and they can't hit you, that you're then putting the shame back on them. So you are fighting the violence with shame. Like you're basically shaming them back. So you're disrespecting them back, which is like, okay, interesting. And I mean, you can Google that and look at that. There's people smarter than me who've kind of explained that better, but it does kind of, I mean, and he goes further. So this author was telling me, he was like, and when they said, walk 2 miles, walk an extra mile, right? So it's like, if this Roman soldier says, walk with me a mile, he goes, walk with them 2. And how do most people think about that when they hear that? They go the extra mile. What do they hear?
Go the extra mile. Yeah. I mean, that's what they hear. It's like,
There's a gas station down the street from my office here that the name of the convenience store attached to it is The Extra Mile, right? Like it's in our culture. It's almost like the Good Samaritan. Like it's
Right.
like we think of
Go farther, do more.
yeah. And it's like you're doing this out of the kindness of your heart. So it's the extra mile that you don't have to do. But Jesus is saying possibly
Right.
if they're going to take you away from your job and make you do this so you don't get paid at work, and they're going to make you carry that, walk an extra mile that they're not allowed to demand from you, because they're allowed to backhand you, but they're not allowed to fronthand you. They're allowed to make you walk a mile, but they're not allowed to make you walk 2 miles. So it's a protest that's saying, like, you don't own me. I'm not your slave. I'm doing this out of my own will.
My own will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can't make me do anything. I'm doing this, and it's almost like, once again, it's this subversive kind of,
silent
response.
response.
And then there's the other one, which is if someone sues you for your cloak, if someone asks you for your cloak,
right.
the same thing. Like, they were allowed to take your clothes off of your back if they're cold, these Roman soldiers, right? And so if they take the outer coat off, what do you have left?
Your inner coat?
Your inner coat.
Yeah.
Which is called your cloak, right? So you have a coat and you have a cloak. What is your cloak? Your cloak is your underwear.
Yeah.
So when he says, give them your second coat, those of you that have 2 coats, give them the second one. It's possible that he's saying, just
give them everything.
Just go naked and flash them. Because in those cultures, it wasn't
honorable.
It wasn't shameful to be naked as much as it was shameful to look upon someone who is naked.
Interesting.
So if you look at somebody who's naked, now you're the dirty one.
Gotcha.
You're not supposed to be looking at that. And so there's like stories, of like nonviolent protests where they would take off their clothes and they would stand in a field naked, so that, or different things like that, as a way of like using their body to like shame them and make them, because they're not supposed to look at it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And they're just like, here I am. Oh, you want my coat? Here, take both of them.
Right.
Oh, you want a mile? Here, I'll go too, because you're not my boss. Here, you're gonna slap me? Well, then maybe you need to do this. There's like this. There's this, and I don't know if that's what it means.
Right.
I don't know if that's what it means. I think we have enough of Jesus's teachings and understanding the gospel to know that he wants us to lay our life down for others.
Jesus said radical things.
Yeah, and he shows us how to lay his life down for others, and
Right.
he shows that. I mean, shoot, he washes the disciples' feet.
Well, he also climbed up on a cross.
Moments before Judas betrayed him, he's washing his
Yeah.
feet. So, we see in other examples of Jesus's, like, and it says in John, like, true love knows nothing greater than the one who lays his life down
Yeah.
for another. So anyways, back to the conversation about what is violence or how to respond, to that. Jesus tends to say, you could build a case there that God's calling you to be a bridge, but not necessarily a doormat.
Correct.
Right. And that's usually like the counsel I give people when they're in a situation where one of the spouses is beating up on them. It's just like, oh, but he loves me, and that's like, dude, and in fact, I hate to say this, but I think even in the acceptance speech of that celebrity, I think he said something along the lines of like, love makes you do crazy things. Right. And it's like, ooh, like, love doesn't make you be violent like that. So, yeah.
I can think of one other scenario where there was violence in the Bible, and we can talk about how Jesus responded to it. But one of his disciples was a former zealot.
Right.
And he cut off, a zealot. Let me give a little context there if you don't know what this was.
Was that Simon Peter, or was it Simon the Zealot?
Simon the Zealot.
Oh, so Simon the Zealot cut off his ear,
Didn't
or did
he?
Peter?
Am I getting it wrong?
I don't know.
Am I getting it wrong?
I don't know.
I would guess it was Simon the
I think
Zealot.
it was Peter.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. Simon's, either way, one of his disciples with the same name, cut off the ear of like an altar boy, essentially. I mean, if that would be like the common name now.
His name is like Malachus or something. I don't know.
And here he was trying to like stand up for Jesus, and he cuts off the dude's ear.
Yeah.
And how did Jesus respond?
Well, let's just talk about was he aiming for his ear? Let's be honest.
I'm sure he wasn't.
He was probably trying to cut his throat, or
Right.
cut his face, or cut his head off.
That's so funny. I just assumed it was Simon the Zealot because he had like a little dagger and was like trying to kill someone.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, in one gospel it says somebody cut off his ear, but then in John's gospel he goes, "Oh, it was Peter."
He just named him.
Yeah, he just throws him under the bus. He's like, "It was Peter, guys. Like, let's just make sure we get this straight." Typical Peter, you know what I mean? Out of nowhere, trying to cut a dude's head off.
Yeah.
And then Jesus is like, "You've been carrying swords the whole time? Like, you've been with me how many years? Like, why would you think this is appropriate?" But Jesus essentially says, I wasn't planning on doing this as my last miracle. Somebody find the ear, put it back on the guy. And then he looks at Simon and he's like, "Dude, bro, like if I wanted to, I could call like thousands of angels down from heaven and roast these fools right now. This is me
that's not the great translation, but yes.
That's not the smoke these dudes.
Roasting these dudes, yeah.
Well, essentially he's like, I got the armies of heaven at my beck and call. This is not an issue of me not having power. This is an issue of me being gentle.
Right.
And I think a lot of times men, we think of gentleness as a lack of power.
Right. As a weakness.
Yeah. And so when we dominate, when we assert ourselves, when we stand up for people, a lot of times it's about like showing that you're strong and powerful. But Jesus was powerful. He was strong. He is the strongest. He's God, and there's no limit. And so what he's trying to tell Peter is it's not that I'm weak, it's that I'm gentle.
It's that I'm withholding my strength.
Right.
And that's actually
gentleness is not weakness.
Right.
Gentleness, in fact, if you are powerful and you hold yourself back,
so good.
That's called being gentle.
Right.
But if you're weak and you hold yourself and you don't have anything, that's just you being weak.
Right.
So the more powerful you are, the greater capacity there is for gentleness.
Right.
Gentleness is a fruit of the Spirit because God knows that we're powerful. Our words are powerful. The way we treat people is powerful. The way we talk about people is powerful. There is a lot of power in physical presence and those kind of situations. And I think if there's any guys out there listening right now, I think at the end of the day, you got to understand that gentleness is a fruit of the Spirit. It is being Christ-like, but it's not evidence of your weakness.
So good.
It's actually evidence of how strong you really are.
That's so important for us to know.
I look at that situation with that celebrity slapping that host, and it's like, I understand that he wanted to respond, and maybe he should have responded, but not violently.
Right.
So I actually I'm working on my master's right now, and we had this big conversation.
I'm going to call you Master Coleman.
Yeah. And in my second year of this program, let's just not get too ahead of ourselves, all right? I still got 2 more to go.
One day.
Yeah. So we're having this conversation about violence and force. There's a difference between violence and force.
Yeah.
Right? So like when I was a kid, the police department was called the force.
Right.
That's what it's called, the force.
The police force.
Yeah. And then on the side of the car, it said to serve and protect, right? And I in fact, I asked my kids, I said, well, are policemen violent? And they're like, no. Well, sometimes.
They're like, it depends on the police
officer. It's been a rough few years. So
right.
they have I think they have a more comprehensive understanding of yeah. So anyways.
Of our world.
Yeah, they've seen some things now, and I usually have those conversations with them during those times about those things, like the Ahmaud Arbery thing. Like I remember talking with like Logan extensively about that. But anyways, make a long story longer. There's a difference between violence and force.
Yeah.
And policemen are not supposed to be violent.
Right.
But they are supposed to have force. They're supposed to use their power, right, to control or
restrain.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the difference. Is violence is usually punitive. Like the reason why that celebrity slapped that person was not just to protect his wife, but was to get him back for what he did.
Right.
Right. That's a whole different situation.
It's a great way to describe
violence
punitive.
And violence escalates. Violence begets violence. Right. But another way he could have responded would be to use force, but not violence.
Right.
So what would that have looked like?
A headlock? I don't know. Is that violent?
Whoa, what if he did that?
I don't know. I mean,
like, what if he walked up there and put him in a headlock?
Would have been stopping someone that was attacking your wife or coming at your wife. Like, dude, you're not going to do anything. You're staying right here.
Yeah.
That's probably more accurate than a headlock. But I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. What would that have looked like if he would have like put him in a headlock and like laughed
been
and
like, dude,
messed up his hair,
I don't know, like
and was
noogie?
like apologized to my wife or something? You know, I don't know. There's something in, I think, men that, you know, I think there is something about us. We feel an obligation to stand up for the women that we love. Mm-hmm. How you do that, like Christ, there's a way to do it that's not violent.
Yeah.
There's got to be a better way. When I asked my oldest son what he thought about that, he was just like, there had to be a better way.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. We live in some crazy times where there's cameras everywhere and everything's recorded now. And so what may not have been, gotten as much press, 100 years ago today, got a ton of press.